happy to bring to you a master naturalist from the Boone's Lake chapter. This is Carolyn Flynn. You may have seen her session earlier on how to make caterpillars with homemade recipes. You'll find that interesting. And she wants to help people identify some of the 3 big pollinators. And there's a pile of resources listed in her session listing. And so let's sit back and enjoy. I'll hand it over to her. Thank you very much for being here, Carolyn.
Yes, thank you so much, Ethan. It's been a wonderful festival, and I'm more than happy to share this information. I am not a professional. I am a gardener, basically, after all. So at any rate, let's go. Why isn't it working? All right. I guess this slide says 2016 on it. This was the year that the St. Louis Zoo put out this awesome 2-color ID guide, lots and lots of information, which would be a wonderful resource too for you. But actually, I was thinking today, I really probably got interested in this in 2006 when Doug Tallamy wrote Bringing Nature Home. And suddenly all my gardening experience began to make sense to me in a whole new different relationship. However, I read this guide back then and I thought, well, that's okay, but it's how do I go forward? So I was hoping to show you lots more videos. Can everyone see this video? It's a bumble on a wild hydrangea. And by the way, before we go any further, I want to say, if you would like to plant a powerhouse keystone species, this is a Missouri native shrub. It's called wild hydrangea. And you will, if you plant this, because of the big white flowers, you will begin to see wonderful and myriads of different insects come to it. So my outline is why, us versus them, who or what is that, tips for looking and learning more resources. We all know about this. I feel like I'm preaching to the choir, but we are in the middle of a historic time. And we know that pollination is essential to ecosystems. That's how things work. And for thousands of years, plants and animals have co-evolved together. That's why native plants and vegetables and fruits are so important. So I tried to look at this from the perspective of a small, tiny invertebrate looking up at us. And when you try to put yourself into a bug's shoes, you find that we are giants, and they're much more likely to run into each other because they're all after the same floral resources. But their main goals are food, escape, and mating. I want to address this fear of flying insects. It's really, it will hold you back, and you have to kind of say in your mind, curiosity is all. That's all you need to do is be curious. So also the thing to remember is that we only see the last quarter of their life cycle. They're really, really busy. Most of these solitary bees and wasps live underground most of the year. Now you're going to ask me what a solitary thing is, and that's the next point. The vast majority of invertebrate pollinators are solitary. That doesn't mean they're completely on their own, but they're one female making one nest, usually underground, but sometimes in above ground plant stems. And we only really have 2 social bees here, the European honeybee and the North American bumblebee. And that's classed as a eusocial, which means not really social. And the difference between solitary and social species dictates their behavioral differences. The main goal of a hornet is to protect and build and protect his community. So we're going to start out here, and just to make the point that we are giants, you got to realize that we are giants, is this is a black chokeberry blossom in the early spring. This is a native bee. This is a crab spider, and that's a predator. He's caught the bee, and there's the giant finger. So one thing that can help us as we learn more is to use a magnifying lens outside. This is a quote from E.O. Wilson. Basically, we can't live without invertebrates, who, if you listen to Scott Black last night, really explained in a wonderful way how the invertebrate species are the majority of life species on our planet. Anyway, so the threats are climate change, competition from invasive species, and this is kind of true, especially when we look at bumblebees, and of course, habitat loss or degradation. So let's go on to the bees. And I put this photo of the left-hand photo is a mason bee, and you can see that bees have actually 3 parts that kind of look like a sausage link to me. On the right is that's Monarda, bee balm, but on the left of that flower is a honeybee. On the right is a bumblebee, and underneath there's a beetle climbing up. So bees are vegetarian. They need both pollen and nectar. We do have about 450 Missouri native bees. I want you to remember that bees are basically hairy and fuzzy, and that's why they're such a good pollinator. Their hair picks up the pollen. They're going to use two sets of wings, and this increases their agility tremendously. In this photo, you'll see the fuzzy bee. You'll see 2 wings, but it looks like 1 because really the 2 wings are hooked together. You want to look for hair on the bee, and you can see the hair all the way from the top of his head down on the legs. Right now, strawberry flowers are blooming. It's a good idea to look at them from behind if you can, or I mean from below them, rather. I'm putting this up there because a lot of people see carpenter bees and think they're bumblebees. I wanted to show you this because this is a large bee, and he has a shiny abdomen. It's just really simple. You can see him, and what he's doing is he's robbing nectar. He's not putting his tongue all the way down the tube of that flower. He is actually doing a shortcut. I have lots of these bees, and they're lots of fun to watch, and they look scary, but they are not. I'll show you a picture later of a young male. This is an ode to how extraordinarily agile bumblebees are for their mass. This is a common milkweed flower, and that's really interesting because they're not easy to get the pollen out of. I've seen lots of native bees caught in them. There's also a little guy hiding right behind the leaf, watching all this. But you can see that the bee is able to go completely upside down and access the nectar. And this one's big enough not to be trapped right in the flower. A common milkweed attracts, that's another powerhouse keystone plant that you can plant easily, except you have to realize that you're going to have it forever. It's never going to go away unless you kill it. It spreads by rhizomes. Okay, on the top left here, there is a leafcutter bee, and they're already out provisioning. This is a small native bee. It's several species in our state. And one thing when you look at pollinators is to realize that when you see these beautiful circular holes in your leaves, you've got leafcutter bees. Why are these guys important? They pollinate squash, many of our foods that we are not. Well, actually, there's a specialist squash bee. But anyway, leafcutter bees cut out that leaf. They lay an egg in it. Then they provision the egg with pollen, wrap it all up, and stick it in a plant stem. And they're awesome. As the warm weather approaches, this is what we're going to see more of. Now, moving on from there to the right is a male carpenter bee. Can you see the yellow, kind of like a mustache? And he's looking at me saying, what do you want? So on the lower, below them is another native bee. He's lost half of his antenna, but again, that's a sort of a close-up of a milkweed flower, which we can marvel at. Now I'm going to show you video on the right, and just bear with me. I hope you don't get car sick or seasick. At any rate, this is a bumble. This plant is one of the ones I'm going to be recommending that we all need to plant more of. It is a wild Missouri native gooseberry. This is something that our grandmothers had. But this little plant, it's in the currant family, of course, is incredibly important for early nectar and pollen. And as you can see, the bee is perfectly capable of working upside down to access the pollen and the nectar on this. After she's finished, those little stamens will make the berries, which turn into the green gooseberry. So we're going to move on to wasp. They're very interesting, and I guess we're just learning more. One of the resources I put in is the work of Heather Home, who has a whole new book out on this, on wasp. And obviously, I mean, you identify them when they're flying, they sort of carry their body upright. They're very elegant. There's a very relaxed, smooth, not erratic like a fly. There's some tips here. One of the best tips is to just kind of be a mountain and just stand still and then watch, because you don't want to, that's the best way that you can actually observe these wasps without attracting attention. So the guy on the right is on a bottlebrush buckeye flower. These photographs come from my little garden here in Fulton. On the left, it looks really strange because it's very magnified, but this is a swamp dogwood, and it is flowering, and this wasp is taking advantage. And you'll note that the wings are very narrow. There are two sets of wings, but they're narrow. We're moving on to flies, and everybody knows what a fly is. I did put a picture of the robber fly here because they are awesome and terrifying. They're about 4 inches long. On the top left, there's a bee, but on the main photograph, which is again the black chokeberry, this is a syrphid fly. We can tell that by looking at its enormous eyes, skinny legs, and it wants to look like a bee. And so there are lots of those. As you start to look at them, you'll see them. Flies are pollinators, very important pollinators. And there's the list. The guy on the right-hand side is a syrphid fly. To see his short antenna and his huge eyes. There's a pair mating on this tiny little native flower. They really do look like triangles, but I want you to notice the carapace, which is often prominent. Now we're down to how we can help. Got lots of ideas. It's been wonderful at this festival to listen to the big picture and to think of it from the bird's point of view, from teachers, parents' point of view. We need to feed invertebrates with, we're not just talking about going out and getting a native perennial. Shrubs and trees are incredibly important to pollinators. The tulip tree blooming, the red maples blooming early in the spring that we don't necessarily see because they're way up higher than our eyesight. And let's not forget about vines. Vines are a good way for most regular people to plant something and see it grow throughout the season. Trumpet vine, you want to be a little careful of because it will take over the world. Anyway, my point here is if you feed them, they will come. If you want tomatoes, you will be seeing bumblebees. Integrated pest management is the way to go. I suggest using wasp spray to deter people only. You can make some wild space. You can leave some small bare earth patches for the ground nesters, which are the majority of our native bees and wasp. And let's stop putting hardwood mulch everywhere. It smothers the system. And if you're the size of a fingernail, imagine trying to move around and move that giant piece of wood, which would look like an enormous boulder to us. You can use leaves and grass clippings. You've got to leave the leaf litter if you want lightning bugs. That's another thing. But let's remember to build up the soil and not degrade it. My goal for several years now is to plant flowering plants to bloom March through November, starting out with witch hazel, which is a wonderful, wonderful Missouri native. There are two types of witch hazel. Our native, Vernalis, is obviously the one that blooms in the spring, but it will bloom around Valentine's Day. Species crocus, redbuds. I saw a lot of bumblebees on the redbuds this year. And see if you can get to the bottle gentian, the late asters, the sunflowers, and also the goldenrods. They are powerhouse plants. And lastly, a thought occurred to me that if we plant foods that we eat, it really makes that connection hit home. So if you can plant gooseberries, black raspberries are a favorite of mine. They taste delicious. The catbird enjoys them. The bees enjoy them. Blackberries, wild strawberries, or cultivated strawberries. Everyone eats, and you get to see the pollinators. So that's all I got.
That was just great. Thank you very much, Carolyn. I've been waiting to see if anybody, you all know probably at this point, you can type questions in or make comments. And those was a good pile of people on here. I enjoyed that very much. I'm just a backyard invertebrate fan myself.
Yeah, and Ethan, that's the point. You don't have to have a huge landscape. You don't have to go out to a park or natural area. You can start at home because these invertebrates are quite small. So don't feel like you're not doing enough if you just leave something alone. Why leave it alone? And this, of course, we all want to be lazy, but there are benefits to being lazy here and there are benefits to getting rid of your lawn, which is just a desert, as we know. And also, one of the most inspiring people I've ever listened to is Doug Tallamy, and he'll be on tonight. He's engendered thousands and thousands of us turning from cultivated just eye candy plants to Missouri natives and learning a lot more about them. And there's a lot more to learn.
There certainly is. I've been learning so much throughout this. We have a question that popped in that asked, do birds eat bees and wasps?
Birds do eat bees and wasps. In fact, it's funny. Chris Egbert was on earlier talking. He's a wonderful woodworker, talking about bee houses, and we were raising mason bees for spring pollination one year, and he made these houses, and I gave him bees that had been shipped in from the state of Washington, specifically blue orchard bees. I gave him a little packet of 20 bees, and he went out and he put the little cardboard box in his bee box, and then stepped back and saw a couple cardinals eat all of those mason bees. So it was like, oh man. Anyway, it's another reason for why you might just want to leave your plant stem standing instead of having massive, big conglomerations of insects that birds can clean up on.
Wow. I once found a honeybee nest because summer tanagers were just hanging out, feeding on them. Every time a bee would fly out, they'd dive bomb after them.
Right.
I have another comment here in the chat. It says, I teach first grade, and sometimes my students get scared at the sight of bees and wasps. I tell them to stand still and watch them. I explain that the bees are just trying to eat their breakfast, lunch, and dinner. I feel more fearful of wasps myself, having been stung as a child. What are safe ways to deter them from gardening sheds, etc.?
I think she's doing absolutely the right thing. Keep still and watch. Wasp, believe it or not, we are not the center of the universe. They are not after us. And I want to say that again, because earlier this year, I was watching that coral honeysuckle that I showed, and it was covered in wasp. They were parasitic wasp. They were searching for aphids that had gotten on the plant. You don't want to use bright colors. I think I mentioned that earlier in the slide. You don't want to wear Axe deodorant or perfume or anything from Bath and Body Shop when you're outside. You want to wear beige and white, because white reflects light and will keep you cooler. And just move slowly. Wasp will not come after you unless they are social. And like I said, besides, the paper wasp, we have a paper wasp, or what we used to call mud daubers. And then we have hornets, and you will know a hornet when you see it. It's huge, it's big, but paper wasp won't bother you either. They're not interested in you unless you're absolutely hovering over their nest, which is going to be hidden in a shrub or tucked away somewhere, and which is also a wonderful thing to show your first graders. The combs, they look like a honeybee comb structure in a big mass, and these wasps create these through chewing fiber and then regurgitating it and building absolute fantastic engineers building that nest, which the tiny little brood cell that they provision with the aphids they caught, or some food for their young, and then they lay an egg in there. So these are wonders that you can introduce to your first graders, and wasp will certainly really not come after you. Now, I wouldn't go near that robber fly, but I don't know how many people have seen robber flies, but I saw one last summer and I was terrified. It was loud, it was noisy, it went straight for 2 or 3 wasps and picked them off within seconds. So stay away from them. Anyway.
I've never been harmed by a robber fly. They sound like little drones almost. They're so loud. And they were sort of hovering around our juice on the porch last year, but they never bothered us, and they hung out. They were just like really good.
They're really interesting, aren't they?
We could do a whole presentation on mud daubers and their different mud structures, which I absolutely love. They're in the garage, in the chicken coop. They never are aggressive at all.
Right.
And they're packing those mud nests full of spiders. So they're actually cleaning up a lot of spiders. Maybe they're getting a few brown recluses. So
yeah. And that's exactly the point, Ethan. The wasps are busy taking care of all the things that we don't want in our gardens. So we really want to welcome wasp.
Emily, the teacher, says that was a wonderful way to explain it. They are not out to get us. Sorry I missed those few first tips. Thank you. I do find that teaching my students about things that they're afraid of helps them to have better understanding and appreciation and less fear. It's absolutely wonderful to hear.
There's a lot of wonder, and we are very blessed to have incredible technology now so that we can take micro photos of these objects. And that's another tip I might add. If you see something outside and you can have a mobile phone and take a picture of it, do that. Try to focus on the insect, take a picture, and then bring it inside later on, late at night or whatever, download it, and then look at that picture and enlarge it. That's been a way that you can start to learn at least. I mean, I don't know the names of these wasp species that I just showed you. I have lots and lots to learn, but the more you learn, the more you want to know. So, but you can take pictures and then enlarge them on your computer, and it will help, especially if you're sending it off to bugguide.net, which is a group of anonymous people who will point you in the right direction without a lot of hassle. You don't have to download anything, and it's throughout the United States. It's normal people, and then, of course, a lot of really smart professionals at this. So that bugguide.net is, if you really are interested in what you're seeing, that's the way to find it.
Carolyn, have you had any success using iNaturalist?
You know, I haven't tried that yet. I have found the Missouri Native Plant Societies who have now taken over wildflowersofmissouri.com or Missouri, whatever. I find the plant societies a really good link, and that's why I included nursery resources in my list. And I gotta say, Missouri Native Wildflowers, none of us would be here today without Mervyn Wallace, who's spent 40 years plus doing this, and he has championed this whole movement. And we're very lucky in this state, I think.
I wonder how many of Merv's plants have been growing throughout the state and then propagating themselves across the state. I mean, just one person's acreage of impact. It must be enormous.
That's right. And he's also a champion of roadside planting too. When you are on Highway 63 headed to Jeff City, the roadsides are fantastic. He's been a champion of that too. So we're all indebted to him. And the Missouri Prairie Foundation's obviously a really good resource. And Missouri Master Naturalist. And this Pollinator Student Steward Program, which I put a link to, is an attempt. It's like, I don't know, say 30 hours. But it's on Wednesdays. And if you're in central Missouri, you can access that. It's an attempt to look at native bees and honeybees and understand more about both of those subjects. So it's interesting in that regard. It's not a straight nature program. It does focus on honeybees, which are managed bees.
So many great resources in our state. There really are. And I appreciate that list of resources that you provided there.
Well, and Bumblebee Atlas, I mean, I'm so excited about that we're able to partner with Xerces. It's going to be wonderful, and started it last year, and it does take a little bit of time to get your net and your vials and all that stuff set up, and then you have to practice catching them, which is not intuitive. But so when I talk to Fish and Wildlife, people are like, no, we don't want you. We want young people who aren't afraid to swing that net and catch them, so it's a learned endeavor. But even kids with those cheap plastic insect nets, you can have fun doing it that way too, as long as you don't harm the insect. Because when you do that, you're more likely to upset the insect, so it doesn't really want to be near you. But unless you're actually going to reach out and pinch a bee or a wasp, they're not going to sting you. Honeybees don't want to sting you because it rips out their stomach and they die. They've got lots of other things to do in a hurry.
Well, I'm sure we all have something to do here in the next coming up sessions, and we really appreciate your time. Your presentations have been just wonderful, and for those of you that joined late, like all the other ones, there will be a recording of this session available under this heading. So thank you very much, Carolyn. I don't see any other questions or comments coming in.
Thanks, Ethan. Great festival. Enjoyed it.
A good one.
Bye-bye.